I remember the day I went to visit my grandma's grave like it was yesterday. It was late in the afternoon, just before the sun started to set. The cemetery was quiet, with only the sounds of birds and the rustling of leaves in the wind. I had a bouquet of fresh flowers in my hand, the kind Grandma always liked, bright yellow daisies. As I walked down the path towards her grave, I noticed something strange. There was an old, unmarked grave a few plots over, covered in weeds and neglected. I don't know why, but I felt drawn to it. The headstone was so worn down that you could barely make out the letters. I could see that no one had visited in a long, long time. After placing the flowers on Grandma's grave, I found myself standing in front of that neglected grave again. It felt wrong somehow, like someone had been forgotten. I tried to read the name, but it was impossible to make out. The air around it felt colder, and to say that it creeped me out would be an understatement. I decided it was time to leave, but as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I had the worst nightmare. I was back at the cemetery, standing in front of that same unmarked grave. But this time, the ground around it was cracked and dry, like something was trying to claw its way out. A figure appeared, a dark shadow with no face, just a pair of glowing red eyes. It spoke to me, its voice echoing in my head saying, "Your family owes a debt. It's time to pay." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. It was just a dream, I told myself, but it felt so real. I tried to forget about it, but the nightmare kept coming back, night after night. Each time the shadow got closer, and its voice grew louder. "You can't escape," it would whisper. "The debt must be paid." I started doing some research, trying to find out more about the cemetery and that grave. I went through old records and asked around, but no one seemed to know who was buried there. It was like the person had been completely erased from history. Then, I stumbled across an old newspaper article from decades ago. It talked about a tragedy that had happened in our town. A woman had died under mysterious circumstances, and her family had been shunned by the community. The article didn't mention her name, but something about it felt connected to the grave. The more I read, the more I realized that this forgotten woman was tied to my family. The article hinted at a curse, something passed down through generations, something my family had tried to hide. I was terrified, but I knew I had to find out the truth. I visited my great-aunt, the oldest living relative on that side of the family. She was hesitant at first, but eventually, she told me the story. The woman in the grave had been wronged by our ancestors, cheated out of what was rightfully hers. In her anger, she cursed our family, vowing that one day we would pay for what we had done. The curse had been forgotten over the years, but now it seemed the spirit of the woman was back to collect. My great-aunt told me that the only way to lift the curse was to uncover the woman's identity and give her the respect and recognition she deserved. But time was running out. The nightmares were getting worse, and I was starting to see the shadow even when I was awake. I knew I had to go back to the cemetery. I went at dusk, just like the first time, and stood in front of that old grave. This time, I brought a small bouquet of daisies, like the ones I'd left for Grandma. I placed them on the grave and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm here to make things right." At first, nothing happened, but then, the wind picked up and I felt that same chill in the air. The ground beneath the grave seemed to shift, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing there, watching me. The shadow from my nightmares. But instead of feeling fear, I felt a strange sense of peace. The figure nodded, and I heard a faint voice in my head, softer this time. "Thank you," it said. And just like that, the shadow was gone. I don't know if the curse is truly lifted, but the nightmares have stopped. I've been visiting that grave regularly, making sure it's kept clean and placing flowers there whenever I can. The name on the headstone is still unreadable, but in my heart, I know who she is now. And I know that in some way she's finally at peace. The whole experience left me shaken, but it also made me realize how important it is to remember those who came before us, even if their stories aren't always pleasant. We can't run from the past, but we can try to make things right, no matter how late it might be. It all started as a joke, just something to do on a boring Saturday night. My friends and I were sitting around trying to come up with something exciting when Craig dared us to check out the old cemetery on the edge of town. The place had been abandoned for decades, and everyone in town had their own creepy stories about it. But we were just kids looking for a thrill, so we agreed. We packed some flashlights and headed out just before sunset. The cemetery was a good walk from my house, hidden behind a thick line of trees. When we finally reached it, the rusty iron gates were hanging open, creaking in the breeze. The headstones were cracked and covered in moss, and the whole place had a weird, heavy silence about it. Craig led the way, laughing as he called out the names on the gravestones. "Come on, this is nothing," he said, waving his flashlight around. But then we saw it. The gravedigger's shack. It was a small, run-down building near the back of the cemetery, almost hidden by the overgrown bushes. The windows were boarded up, but the door was slightly ajar, swinging back and forth as if someone had just gone inside. None of us had ever heard about a shack being out here, so naturally, we had to check it out. We pushed the door open, and the first thing that hit me was the smell, like damp earth and something metallic. Inside, there were old, rusty tools scattered around, shovels and pickaxes leaning against the walls. But what really caught our attention were the graves. Freshly dug graves. Right outside the shack. "Guys, this is weird," Sarah whispered. "This place is supposed to be abandoned, right? So who's digging graves?" We all stood there, staring at the dark, open pits. Craig tried to play it cool, but even he seemed uneasy. "Maybe someone's using this place for, I don't know, something shady," he said. "We should get out of here." But as we turned to leave, we saw a light in the distance, a faint flickering glow coming from deeper in the cemetery. It was a lantern, swaying slowly as it moved closer. And then we saw him, a tall, shadowy figure holding the lantern in one hand and a shovel in the other. "No way," Tom muttered, his voice shaking. "Is that the grave digger?" It didn't make sense. The cemetery had been closed for years, and there shouldn't be anyone out here. But there he was, moving between the gravestones, as if he was looking for something, or someone. We ducked behind a row of tombstones trying to stay out of sight. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure the gravedigger would hear it. We watched as he stopped in front of one of the freshly dug graves, raised his shovel, and started digging. The sound of the shovel hitting the dirt was the only thing breaking the silence. "We need to go," Sarah whispered, grabbing my arm. But before we could move, the gravedigger turned toward us. Even from a distance, I could feel his eyes on us, like he knew we were there. He started walking our way, slowly at first, then faster, the lantern swinging wildly in his hand. "Run!" Craig shouted, and we bolted, dodging between the headstones, trying to find our way back to the gate. But no matter how fast we ran, it felt like the gravedigger was right behind us, his footsteps echoing in the night. We finally made it to the gate. But when I looked back, the gravedigger was standing just a few feet away, staring at us. He didn't say a word, just watched as we scrambled to get through the gate. As soon as we were out, we didn't stop running until we were back on the main road, panting and out of breath. None of us spoke for a long time. We just kept walking, glancing over our shoulders every now and then, half expecting to see that lantern light coming after us. When we finally got back to my house, we tried to laugh it off, but the fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadowy figure, the gravedigger, standing over those freshly dug graves. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, maybe some old caretaker keeping an eye on the place, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. A few days later, we heard that the police had found a body in one of those graves. It wasn't anyone we knew, just some drifter passing through town. They never found out who buried him there, but I had a pretty good idea. I don't know what we saw that night, but I do know one thing. I'm never going back to that cemetery again. And if you ever get a dare to explore some creepy abandoned place, just say no. You never know what or who you might find waiting for you. I've always been fascinated by history, especially the dark and mysterious kind. So when I heard about the old cemetery on the edge of town, with its ancient family crypts and whispered legends, I knew I had to see it for myself. There was one crypt in particular that caught my attention, the one belonging to the Blackwood family. They were notorious in their time, known for their strange rituals and sudden unexplained deaths. One chilly afternoon, I made my way to the cemetery with a backpack full of research tools and my trusty notebook. The place was eerily quiet, with the wind whispering through the trees and the sun casting long shadows across the tombstones. The Blackwood crypt stood at the far end, its stone walls covered in moss and vines, as if nature itself was trying to hide it from the world. I pushed open the heavy iron door, which creaked loudly as it swung open. Inside, the air was cold and stale, filled with the scent of dust and decay. I could see the old stone coffins lined up against the walls, each one marked with the name of a Blackwood family member. As I explored, I noticed something odd, a faint outline of a door on the back wall of the crypt, almost hidden beneath a layer of grime. My curiosity got the best of me, and I began to scrape away the dirt with my hands. After a few minutes of effort, I uncovered the edges of the door. It was small, just big enough for someone to crawl through, and it looked like it hadn't been opened in centuries. My heart pounded with excitement. This was exactly the kind of discovery I had been hoping for. With a bit of effort, I managed to pry the door open. It led to a narrow passageway that sloped downward into the darkness. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should turn back, but the thrill of uncovering something hidden pushed me forward. I switched on my flashlight and crawled into the passage, feeling the cold, damp air against my skin. The passage led to a small chamber deep beneath the crypt. The walls were lined with shelves, and on them sat various artifacts, ancient books, strange symbols carved into stone, and bizarre objects that I couldn't even begin to identify. In the center of the room was a large, ornate chest, covered in intricate designs that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. I opened the chest carefully, revealing its contents: a collection of old yellowed papers, a small black box, and a thick, leather-bound diary. I picked up the diary, noticing the name on the cover: Sebastian Blackwood. This must have been the journal of the family patriarch, the one who had started all the strange rituals that the Blackwoods were known for. As I flipped through the pages, my excitement turned to dread. The diary was filled with descriptions of dark rituals, sacrifices, and invocations meant to summon the dead. It was clear that Sebastian had been deeply involved in the occult, and that he had gone mad with his obsession. The last entry in the diary spoke of a curse, one that would be unleashed if the artifacts in the chamber were ever disturbed. I froze. Had I just activated the curse by opening the chest? My hands trembled as I closed the diary and placed it back inside. I needed to get out of there, but as I turned to leave, I heard a low, whispering voice echo through the chamber. The air grew colder, and I could feel a presence all around me, something ancient and angry. I bolted for the passage, scrambling up the slope as fast as I could. As I reached the entrance to the crypt, the iron door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. My heart raced as I fumbled with the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Suddenly, the shadows in the crypt began to move, swirling around me like a dark cloud. I could see faces forming in the darkness, twisted, anguished faces of the dead, their eyes glowing with malice. They whispered my name, taunting me, and filling my mind with nightmarish visions of their deaths. I screamed and pounded on the door, but no one could hear me. The spirits drew closer, their cold breath on my neck, their voices growing louder and more insistent. I felt like I was losing my mind, their torment driving me to the brink of madness. Desperate, I remembered the diary's warning about the curse. I needed to return the artifacts and appease the spirits, or I'd be trapped here forever. With shaking hands, I pulled the diary, the papers, and the black box from my backpack and placed them on the ground in front of me. The spirits paused, their whispers fading to a low murmur. I opened the black box, revealing a small, blood-stained dagger. The moment I touched it, a wave of memories that weren't mine flooded my mind. Memories of the rituals, of the blood sacrifices that had taken place in this very crypt. I knew what I had to do. With the dagger in hand, I recited the incantations I had read in the diary. The words felt foreign and dangerous on my tongue, but I forced myself to keep going. The shadows began to recede, the faces of the dead fading back into the darkness. I felt a moment of relief, but it was short-lived. Just as I finished the final incantation, the iron door creaked open. I looked up to see a figure standing in the doorway, a man with wild eyes and a twisted grin, holding a tattered ancient book. He was Sebastian Blackwood, the madman from the diary, or at least what was left of him. He stepped toward me, and I felt the weight of the curse pressing down on me. The spirits hadn't been appeased. They had been waiting for this moment, for the return of their master. With a final desperate plea, I threw the artifacts back into the chest and slammed it shut. There was a blinding flash of light, and when I opened my eyes, the crypt was silent. The shadows were gone, the spirits vanquished, but the door was still open. I didn't wait to see if Sebastian would return. I ran as fast as I could out of that cemetery, vowing never to return. Even now, I can still feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. The curse may have been broken, but I know that the spirits of the Blackwood Crypt are never truly gone. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear their whispers, calling me back. Thanks for watching. Don't miss out on more spine-chilling tales. Subscribe now for weekly scares. Hit that red button and join our journey into the unknown.